listeners, welcome to episode 5 of our Chasing the Vision series in partnership with Exit Strategies and Violand. If you're catching us in the middle of the series, welcome. We have gotten a lot of feedback on this series so far, and so we are excited to have more and more listeners and kind of the audience growing episode after episode. If you're here catching us in the middle, you can find all of the episodes on CNR's YouTube page, your favorite podcast streaming platform, and on the CNR website under videos. So please be sure to catch up on those. So far, we've covered owner involvement, the role of the management and leadership team, company identity, market conditions, and there's more topics to come. So this series is all about sharing valuable insights, strategies, and hard-learned lessons accumulated over many years of experience between JT and Tim, who are the experts in the room here. They're sharing their secrets to having a sustainable business. All right, so in this episode, we are talking about customer base. So welcome to Tim and JT. Welcome back to more of recordings in this series. We've been knocking a few of these out at a time, which is really exciting. So Tim, I'm going to toss it over to you. I know we're talking about customer base, but I'm going to tee you right up here because you said that you had some fanfare this week. So I want to hear what you've heard other people saying about the series so far before we jump into talking about customers.
I did have fanfare, Michelle, and JT, you'll be happy to know I was doing a program this week on project management, and one of the attendees of the program came up and he said, "Hey, I listen to your podcast, you and JT, all the time." I said, "That's awesome." And what made it even better is that this gentleman was from Canada. So we're now officially an international hit, JT. How you like that?
Nice. Hey, we've got at least one listener. That's awesome.
I know it. Yeah, but you're right, Michelle. I've heard from several people that they've gained a lot of value from the podcast and the things that we talk about. And I think more so the method in which we talk about it as well. It's pretty candid and lay it all out on the line. So love doing it.
Yes. So for anybody who's listening, if you have questions for Tim and JT, please feel free to reach out to me or to them. And those are things that we could even discuss in a future episode or whatever that may be. So keep the conversation going with us. This is meant to be as helpful as possible. So, okay, Tim, set the stage for us on customer base. What are the ways that revenue is broken down for restoration companies? If anyone is looking at their income statement, how much revenue would they see from different channels that restoration companies are ideally bringing in business from?
Right. So when we look at a company's income statement, we look at their revenue categories. It tells us a lot about the organization from multiple aspects. But from an analysis standpoint, we look for it to help set us up and understand the other items that are on the income statement from a profitability standpoint. So it's no secret that our business is broken down into several different revenue streams. You've got mitigation work, repair work, mold remediation work, sometimes environmental abatement or other types of trade categories. Each one of those trades, the services that you offer, they have an expected gross profit margin or degree of profitability that you would have with each one of those. Some are higher than others. So if you're a mitigation heavy company, which has a tendency to have much higher gross profit margins, we would expect to see things be higher at the gross profit level, but maybe a little bit different at the expense and net level as well. So the mix of that revenue is really important to how we take a look and break down and analyze an income statement. I guess from just a kind of a benchmarking standpoint, a discussion there, for most full service companies that we look at, whether you're doing a mix of revenue in the mitigation services and the repair services, the profitable ones that we see that generate healthy cash flow, they've got a good mix of business. We like to see their mitigation work represent greater than 20% of their total revenue streams. But, and this is a big but, we like to try to see their repair side of things be less than 50% of that total. So the balance can be whatever you want it to be. But it seems to me that whenever you have companies that are in those ranges or within those benchmarks, they have a tendency to have healthier bottom lines and better cash flow in the business.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then the elephant in the room kind of question mixed in with this is TPA work. That's a huge part of our industry and a big source that companies get revenue from. So JT, I guess I'll toss this one to you first. When somebody's looking at a company, is there a balance of TPA work versus work that's coming in more organically that people prefer to see from a restoration company?
Yeah, that's a personal decision for a lot of owners. But let me back up a few years. When I got into this space in 2007, people were flocking to these TPA lists because they didn't want to be left behind. They thought the wave of the future was going to be all TPAs and, so many contractors per zip code, et cetera. And over the years, and Tim might verify this, that there's been a little bit of disenchantment, we'll say, and a little bit of frustration with the management oversight and some of the stringent reporting responsibilities. And so now many of my clients are 10 or 15% or less. They've managed to fill their funnel with direct methods. And frankly, to Tim's point, some of these referral sources and being a TPA, if you've got systems and procedures that are built for non-TPA work, it's frustrating to get into. If you started on the TPA side and now working back into direct work, it's easier. Some of these project management and oversight, et cetera. So the TPA work is really personal. I would say the less the better when it comes to a sell. There's more types of buyers out there for direct work. I work with several clients that are 40 to 50%, and that's really pushing the envelope, and even some that are 90 to 95%. And their reasoning is, hey, I can't create a sales division for that. I'll just take all the TPA work I can get. And there's very few buyers at that level. They just don't want to be beholden at that level to TPAs.
Tim, what's your kind of take on this?
Yeah, I'm in alignment with you, JT. Go back to your first statement, and I think you mentioned it again about being a personal decision. I think I would even take it to the point where saying it should be strategic. So if it's part of your plan, to cater to that type of audience or that type of referral source, then I like to see, as you mentioned, the policies, the procedures, the processes in your business be in alignment with servicing those accounts. I don't want to say it has to be an all or nothing, Michelle, but from what I've seen, the companies that are successful in doing TPA work, they've structured their business around that strategy, and they've put the mechanisms in place to, really perform in accordance with the expectations that the programs have, and really that they just built their business that way.
And more, I'll just add this, Tim, that I'm working with clients that are turning the programs on and off based on how busy they are. And some will be on for mitigation, but not recon or the putback, or vice versa, based on their comfort level and where's busy, where they are the busiest. And that's interesting. That's a new thing the last 18 months in my office, is learning how they're turning them on and off as needed. Right.
And really, Michelle, the question you probably want to ask is there one or not another that's better? And, I think my personal preference, I'll interject my opinion. I think the ones that are not doing TPA work are the companies that are outperforming, at least financially outperforming those who are doing TPA work, with few exceptions. There are a few exceptions out there, but from what I've seen, the ones not doing the TPA work are the ones that are the highest performing.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, I think you're both in agreement with a lot of the industry on that one. So yes. All right. So Tim, let's expand on customer base a little bit. What are some of the best referral sources for contractors today? I know, I've heard John Monroe and others talk about, how they go anyway. You know where I'm going. He coaches people on referral
John's
sources.
John's a sales guy, so he's going to tell you what you want to hear, right?
Yeah. Yes. So what are the best referral sources
to the podcast or not?
We'll see.
Anyway, go ahead.
Sorry. So what are the best referral sources for contractors? I mean, I was talking about John because he talks about, the days of kind of taking donuts to an agent. That's really not where we're at anymore. So what are some good referral sources for contractors today? 2024, modern day sales, post-COVID world, all those things.
Yeah, fair enough. That's like asking who's got the best ice cream. It's all good. I'd say the best referral sources are the ones that are repeatable. The ones that you can get repeat business with, and you can have an opportunity to sustain and grow those relationships. So, whether it comes from a plumber or another trade contractor, it comes from an agent or an adjuster or a property manager, there's a lot of options that are out there. And again, come back to the strategy side of things. Your business has to be built in a direction that you're able to not just get that work in situational occurrences, but on a regular and ongoing basis. And to me, that's what I look at. I don't think there's a specific one in the marketplace where you could put your finger on it right now and say, this referral source is hot, this year. It just doesn't work like that.
Are there any referral sources that Go ahead, JT.
Well, I was going to say at some point, Tim used the word diversification. And I love that word because of all the the referral resources out there. When you think about GCs or facilities managers or HOAs or healthcare companies or property management associations, they're strewn across the board where they could come from. And I think when I'm talking to clients, the best referral sources are built on not only the repeatability, as you said, Tim, but on a real relationship. An example of that is plumbers right now. In the last 4 or 5 years, it's been a real hot topic, and it's not happening so much anymore, but it was like the Wild West out there with these plumbers. And it was, I'm going to use a term that may be a little out of favor, but a lot of these plumbers were prostituting themselves to the highest bidder on who was going to pay the most for these jobs. And it's not a sustainable model. You just can't keep escalating and escalating. And I've got a couple of clients who are really thinking outside of the box. It has very little to do with money, but they're taking care of these plumbers, and they know these plumbers feel valued. And especially when you can do things like, you get the referral from a plumber, and then you sort of somewhere between insist and recommend that they come in for the putback, that you keep scratching each other's back to make it a symbiotic relationship and not just a transaction. Because I think twice last year I valued companies where owners are literally going to the bank to get cash and handing cash to a plumber on a job site. I mean, that's so the way it shouldn't be when we're trying to keep clean financials. So just throw that in from left field.
Look, JT, I mean, you alluded to that shallow relationship when you're paying somebody to play, right? And I don't want to say worse off, but in the same token, you're paying the technicians of those companies to give you a referral, which is the most effective way to do that.
Yeah.
You create a situation where if your business development rep, the person that maintains that relationship, goes on vacation for a week or two or goes somewhere else, that money goes with them, the relationship goes with them. It's not sustainable in the long run.
That's right.
But I can also say that there are genuine relationships that can develop out of that. So plumbers are just like any other trade contractor, where they value the people who they give your name out on. If you're taking care of them and they value that over the money, the money might be a nice thing. The money may not even be existent in some situations. But if you have that reliability of saying, hey, I've partnered with a credible organization that's going to not just help you out, but make me look good in the same token, I mean, you've got a win-win on your hands there too. But one other thing while we're on the plumbers, JT, and I don't know if you've seen this or not, but I've seen some transactions the integration post-transaction, when you go to sell a business, if you've got any sizable entity that's acquiring that business, whether it be a PE roll-up or a national firm, they've got already pre-established positions, and they're usually not favorable on marketing to plumbers. And that revenue stream goes away. So, you may have a revenue stream that you think is valuable to your organization today, but post-acquisition for a larger entity, they're going to pull the plug on that program pretty quickly, and numbers are going to drop like a rock.
I've seen that a couple times. I think some of that has been bred from this Wild West, characterization that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. I haven't seen it quite as much recently because they realize it's a valuable source, but there are a few of the industry strategics that absolutely won't do it. They just don't believe it's a good model at all. And I don't know if I'm in that camp entirely. They just want to compete with something that's sustainable instead of something that can disappear tomorrow. So I get it completely. I can see both sides.
Do either of you have examples of outside the box referral sources that you've seen contractors pull in? It might not be like a top referral source, but like, hey, we landed like this one large loss or a big loss from this one random referral source that we had not been counting on. Any examples?
Out of the box. JT, what have you seen?
Well, they're all in the box. I mean, the restoration contractors will take referrals from anywhere, right? And
Yes.
I think what's happening is, you said it. There's no more bringing donuts down the street to the agent. That's a thing of the past. And there are still a few companies trying to do that. And there is a way to network with agents. I'm a firm believer in that, but it's not what it was 10 years ago. And I have more and more clients throwing really sizable dollars at monthly pay-per-clicks and Google AdWords and really finding wonderful success. So marketing in general has changed drastically, as we all know. I think the more key item is the type of referral and the size of the referral and whether it's repeatable. Any company is, as I've always said, these restoration contractors, they're one phone call away from a record year. And let's say you're a company doing $6 million a year and you land $1.5 million fire job in a commercial project. Well, that fundamentally changes your year. It's 25% of your business. Let's say that $1.5 million job throws off 500,000. It's been nice and profitable, and it's a third of your income for the year. Well, that one referral is glorious. It is. It's a wonderful thing. But if that's the only type of project you get like that, and let's say you happen to be for sale, a buyer's going to come along and look at that, and they're not going to give you credit for it. It's a one-off. Mm-hmm. And you've proven that you can do it, but nothing about that is repeatable. And until you get 4, 5, 6 of those a year for a couple of years running, now it becomes normal course of business. So the risk in my world, Michelle, is not where it came from. It's the type of work and what it does to your bottom line and whether it's a normal course of business or not. I know, Tim, you've seen that as well. I'm sure you have, but that's where the risk comes in my world.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would reinforce the sustainability and the regularity of it. That is important. I guess, Michelle, to answer your original question, was out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
I think most of us think inside the residential box. So pretty
Mm-hmm.
traditional agent, adjuster, TPA referrals, trade contractors. I played in the commercial space for a lot of years, and my kind of, I wouldn't call them out of the box, but maybe hidden gems that were my favorites were always the professional services lines. So your risk managers, your construction management firms, your industrial hygienists. Those are all the professional services that are already involved in a project, and the ones that are working in the damage repair space, they want to work with credible contractors. So they're looking for, relationships that they can have a successful project from start to finish with. And if you get referred or brought in to even bid a job by those individuals, I think you're going to have a much more enjoyable and profitable experience than if you got that job from, the Yellow Pages or, I'd say Yellow Pages. I'm dating myself to Google search or even, somebody knocking on a door, trying to get in on a one-off bid situation.
Okay. So continuing on that comment about you working the residential versus commercial space, this is a big area where kind of the industry is seeing a shift, and more contractors are more and more interested in having more commercial work, less residential work. So I'm curious both of your takes on that and kind of the shift that's going on in the industry. Is there, are we facing a time when there's even going to be some money left on the table in residential because everybody's chasing commercial? Is that not really happening? I don't know. This is a big question, but JT, you want to take that away first?
Sure. I'll start. I'll just start with my comment from a minute ago that commercial can be a little bit lumpy, right? It's higher margin. It's outside of Xactimate parameters a little bit. There's a new custom price list out there. There's some really good coaching with Ben Justine, and there's things that contractors are starting to latch onto that are helping with margins. We all know the squeeze, as I call it, is never going to go away. Insurance companies would rather hang on to their money. And I don't blame them. They're in a business too. But the commercial is nice to land. There's no doubt about it. But it's got to be normal course of business. And if you've got a really good construction manager and a construction division, there's a lot of money to be made on that side. So I'm all for that. But you've got to get through the lumpy stage, of these larger projects. And, there's large loss and CAT, and that's a whole nother discussion, but we'll keep it at large loss for now. But if you get really good at large loss, there's pretty good money to be made. And it's not, I don't believe it's too taxing on a business. And Tim, you might think otherwise. You're down in the trenches on a regular basis. But if you can get into that large loss category, it's a magical place to be if you can do it well, because the margins are pretty good.
Yeah, it is taxing, JT, just to answer that question. Only because the projects have a tendency to be financially larger. So you've got a little bit more burden there. So you need to carry a little bit of capital. The payment terms can be negotiated. You can get funding, for the project at any point, as long as it's negotiated up front. On the backside, you maybe wait a little bit longer for the final payment, or there may be a recoverable holdback, a retainer associated with the job, depending on how big it is. But when you say commercial, marketplaces, Michelle, you can break that down into 7 or 8 different derivatives.
100%.
You've got multifamily, you've got, light commercial, you've got, office building space, you've got institutional work, industrial, retail, you name it. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And they're all different. So I think the attraction now is something we've been trying to promote for a lot of years, is if you're not going to play inside of the box with your traditional work on the residential side, you need to think really outside of the box. And I mean far outside of the box. In what area do you want to specialize in? Can you create a niche for yourself that creates that sustainable revenue stream? And can you build a business that caters to that? I've worked with several clients that have done this successfully over the years, thinking of one in particular that was in a major city center. And their focus was on Class A real estate. And they did great work, especially in high-rise buildings. So when you're in that type of geographic location with that type of audience in a very concentrated environment, you've got a niche that a lot of people can't get into. And I think one of the things they did really well was the location of where they were at. They were so close to their client base that the competitors, it took them hours and hours to respond to a call that they could have gotten to in 10 and 15 minutes. So, there's a lot that goes into that commercial space.
Yes. Okay. All right. So JT, when you're doing a valuation on a company, are there referral or revenue streams that bring greater value to a company that, potential buyers would be looking at? Or if a company is just coming to you for a valuation, like how much is my company worth, certain revenue streams that are better than others, or referral sources?
There's 2 parts to that. One is just margin of the project, right? And some projects are better than others. But where I like to start with referrals is, where are they coming from? I'm going to ask what your top 5 referral sources are, and what percentage of your gross sales does each one of those account for? I've had a situation where a restoration contractor had a brother-in-law at a facilities maintenance company, and a tremendous amount of work was coming their way due to this referral and familial relationship, right? Well, a buyer comes along, that may stop. So you never know what risks are in there. But I always start with the top 5 referral sources and what type of work is being referred, because you want to know that. From a buyer perspective, you need to alleviate that risk and make sure that they're going to continue. So short of that, I'm not as concerned what the sources are as to the volume from each one.
Okay. Tim, anything you want to add to that one?
Well, yeah, that diversity that we keep talking about is key in that element. And one of the things we look at is, from a total standpoint, that no one referral source or event or project represents greater than 20% of their top line revenue. So if you can maintain that, you lower that risk threshold that we're talking about, and you can prove to your anybody really that you can continue to sustain that business and grow it in the future.
Well, and when you're talking, sorry, Michelle, when you're talking about client diversification, it's 3 or 4-fold. It's about where your referral sources are coming from, the size of your projects. I always ask about the size, your top 4 or 5 projects every year for 2 or 3 years. I need to know that. Every buyer asks that question. It comes down to, your percentage of MIT versus recon. There's 4 or 5 buckets that help with client diversification. And then sometimes it comes down to classification. You might have a high rise that Tim just mentioned a minute ago. And let's say you've got a water pipe break and there's 13 to 15 condos affected. Well, some companies will call that one project, and others will say, no, there was 14 projects in there. It was either $1 million project or 14 that equaled $1 million. So sometimes it's just a bookkeeping methodology. And I also like to clarify that, because we just can't have any surprises when we get close to the closing table.
JT, maybe could we talk a little bit about the difference between the customer base and service lines?
Absolutely.
Because we're kind of intermingling maybe a little bit of that discussion here. But just so everybody's clear, the listeners are clear, we're talking about where the work comes from, not necessarily the services that you're providing to them as well.
Yeah, correct.
Yep. Good differentiation.
Yep.
So, Tim, I was going to ask you to dive into something that you were talking about a little bit ago about being too concentrated. We were talking about being too concentrated in one area and needing to diversify. So, what are some ways for companies that are like, oh my gosh, one thing could be we're 75% TPA work and only 25% bringing in stuff on our own. What is the first step or the for initial steps toward differentiating and getting different referral sources and different revenue sources in general?
Yeah, so I think the specialization side of things is key to this, right? And everybody's looking for a differentiator in the marketplace. And as the competition kind of ebbs and flows over the course of the life of the business, um, everybody's going to come to the table with an angle. There's a reason why you should come and use our company versus our competitors. And at the end of the day, I don't want to say it's a commodity based business because it's not. Every project is unique. But at the end of the day, if you look at the work that we do in this industry, a dry house is a dry house is a dry house, right? How it got dry, or how quickly it got dry is then now that's a whole different discussion. Same thing with the repair side. Most customers that you work for in this business get their property restored to the way it was before, if not maybe a little bit better. Okay, so we're not getting into value added engineering or that kind of stuff. Slab up reconstruction is a whole different monster as well. But again, when you're looking at the basic services that are provided, the end product is very similar from project to project to project. So in my eyes, if you're going to then differentiate yourself from your competitors, you've got to come up with a way of specializing it or giving the customer a reason why they would want to choose you over the competition. So having some unique knowledge, some unique expertise, whether that be technical in the business, right? The restorative technical science side of things, or the way your company produces that project. Maybe you communicate better, you plan better. You can go to the craftsmanship side of things if you want. We have a better work product than anybody else, but pick a way, and then make sure that you're not competing head to head with your competition on that same point, and start down that road. Then you'll get some fanfare, you'll get some traction, and you can continue to build off of that differentiation strategy.
Perfect. JT, anything you want to add to that one?
I love it when Tim gets down in the weeds. I love it when he goes there.
That's a good answer.
From my seat, when it comes to, let's say an imbalanced company or one that has client risk factors, it depends on how much gas is left in the tank of the owner to fix it. Some owners will call me from a hospital parking lot and say, you got to get me out of here. I need out next week if possible. And those are tough. There are companies that'll call and say, I'm on a 3 to 5 year plan. Let's get teed up. Let's help me out. What do I need to do to make myself the most sellable? That's the best case scenario. And then a lot of people are on a 1 or 2 or 3 year plan. So when I come along and say, oh, you're a little imbalanced here, we ought to try to fix this. Some can and some can't. If you're a company that's 50% TPA work, that's tough to just fix in a year, right? I'll never tell a company to walk away from that kind of money, but you've got to bring up the other side of the business, let's say a direct side, to minimize that percentage on the TPA side. So if it's imbalanced and you don't have time to fix it, doesn't mean it's not sellable. It means if we've got to address it, typically by way of an earnout, we've got to alleviate that risk. We've got to level the playing field for a buyer. So we've got to ensure that those relationships and that referral source, if that's the case, is referred over to that buyer. And it's done so with an earnout. And once we do that successfully, then we can get the seller compensated for the balance of the value of their business.
Yeah. Can I throw a gold nugget on the table there?
Perfect.
Oh, yes.
So aside from the things that we're talking about, but I want to marry where you're going with that, JT, is you have to have knowledge, and you have to have expertise now that can be transferred in that scenario from one owner to the other without it being a relationship or everything being inside the head of the owner, right? One of the favorite strategies that I have is this idea of proprietary systems that organizations can develop. Your workflow process, your job process from start to finish, you can claim ownership to that, and you can put your own copyright trademark symbol on it or whatever. You lay that process out. And if you say that's our process and it's proprietary, it's yours. Now that's got some value because they're not just buying the customers and the employees and the assets of the business. Now they're buying intellectual property that you've created that is also tied to your differentiation strategy. So there's a world of advantages in that type of scenario.
And it's even better when that proprietary systems and processes, it translates into a higher margin on the bottom line. That's best case scenario.
Without a doubt.
I can think of some companies that have those and they protect those heavily.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. My favorite part of every episode is story time. So story time at this point, it can be kind of either way, the importance or the dangers of not differentiating your revenue streams. So who wants to go first with a story?
Tim, take it away.
I'll throw one that's this has always been a favorite of mine. And since we were talking about TPAs earlier, there is that risk, right? That the one phone call, one bad job, that third-party administrator, that repair program can shut you off, and there goes an entire month's worth of business right down the tubes. So I like a strategy that we worked with a company when they were a lot smaller than what they are today, but they did 95% of their work was all third-party administrator, managed repair program work, that kind of thing. And their strategy the whole time was to build a codependency. So rather than them being dependent solely on the TPA to give them work in exchange for good work that they did, their goal was to build enough volume in their geographic area that third party now was dependent on them to get that amount of work done. So and it did work. It worked out in their favor, and they're a flourishing company today. And but it was a little proud moment to see that play out. And I don't think I've seen anybody take that strategy before. So that was a success.
When the TPA is calling saying, please turn back on, please turn back on. I need you to take our jobs. Please turn back on. Yeah. Okay, JT, what about you?
Well, we could tell, between Tim and I, we could probably tell hundreds of stories about companies that have been imbalanced. That they're everywhere, frankly. And it's from my seat and from 100 feet up, a well-balanced company, I'll say, doesn't necessarily add value. Buyers expect the company to be well-balanced and have no client risk factors. So when it exists, it does nothing but detract a little bit from value, or maybe restructure a deal a little differently with an earnout or some sort of a clawback to a full purchase price. So one of the risks in my mind, this will be a little bit different of an answer than what you might be expecting, is the seller of the business has seen their business one way for decades. And let's say they're working with somebody who's given them referrals for 15 years, and they're talking about a transition and a new buyer. It's almost offensive to some of these sellers to think that relationship is going to go away. They just can't imagine that this wonderful business has treated me so well for so long. It doesn't mean that what you're selling is exactly what the buyer's going to get. And they've got to make sure that these referral sources and transitions are made successfully, or it has no value to a buyer. So one of the first sort of horror stories and difficult parts is getting a seller to understand that it's got to be transition. And it's not just the way you operated it, it's how a buyer's going to operate and how they're going to fit into this puzzle piece that we've created. So if we can get through that, then everything else typically falls into place.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Anything else that either of you want to add on customer base and differentiation, all of that, before we wrap it up and head into the next episode?
No, that was good information there. And there's certainly a lot of different rabbit holes we could have gone in. I mean, JT likes it. We get in the weeds.
That's right.
Maybe we'll do a follow-up episode really into the weeds.
Terrific. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you both. We will see you on the next episode. We are talking about financial cleanliness, which I think is going to be another really interesting conversation, and maybe shed some light on areas that are maybe gray for owners, or that you don't know what should go in the books, what shouldn't, and what a really clean book actually look like. So check us out on the next episode. Thank you, Tim and JT.